Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Renee Bahati Klug.
I'm Teresa Stager.
Today, we analyzed Chapter 8, Dr. Jonathan Jansen's article, When Politics and Emotion Meet, Educational Change in Racially Divided Communities. In it, Jansen writes that, quote, the manifestation and treatment of emotion in educational and other organizations is intimately related to the cultural context, end quote. He offers 7 theses for change, and underscoring each solution is the idea of empathy. To demonstrate how emotions can be impacted by culture, we'll start by looking at the human value continuum. 2 statements representing different perspectives on a cultural value reveal how, without empathy, it is difficult to engage someone outside of our culture because we might be too busy blaming them for their difference. So to start, I want to talk about the difference between generalizations and stereotypes. Generalizations are starting points. They're a point of entry to understanding other cultures or other people. Stereotypes, however, are what we want to avoid. They're ending points and they're inflexible. So let's say we are talking interculturally and I am a student from foreign country X, and I am going to visit the United States. And I'm very excited, but I have an issue. I'm scared about the eating habits of typical Americans. I don't know about eating out so much, and certainly not all of the junk food. So I get to the United States and my homestay family ends up being raw vegans. They cull everything from their gardens and they very rarely go out. And what I end up saying is, well, they must not be very American. And that underscores the inflexible stereotype, where even our experience won't change or modify the generalization. And with that, I present the human value continuum. And what it is meant to do is allow you to recognize your worldview on a particular value in comparison with how other people, even those within your same culture, might view on that same value. So I'm going to put up 2 statements. If you agree more with the statement in black, recognize that and you mark it down or whatever. Or if you agree on the statement on the bottom, you can mark that down. And sometimes you might agree a little bit with both. Keep in mind that this is to be evaluated through your professional context. And recognize the diversity of thinking throughout nations and cultures. So the first value, do you believe that time is money? It is limited, we should not waste it, and that deadlines and being on time is very, very important? Or that time is life, it's abundant, we should enjoy it. Deadlines could be loosey-goosey. In general, more Western nations believe that time is money. We have Spanish, Italian, and Middle Eastern and Asian nations who believe that time is more cyclical and a relationship should be cultivated before time is exacted. Second, do you believe more with the statement in black? My identity is determined more by my personal choices than by my community. And community here represents religion, culture, and family. Or do you agree more with the statement, my identity is determined more by my community than by my personal preferences? Again, the top value is represented mostly by Western cultures and even English-speaking cultures. And almost the rest of the world feels like they are connected in a more interdependent way to others. For example, in the United States, often we get to choose whatever political party we want to be a part of. And sometimes we make changes throughout the decades. Whereas in China, it's a communist nation, they don't get a choice on government. In the US, we get to choose our partners, who they are, if they even are. But in India, in many places, arranged marriage is still pretty common for not everybody, but for many people. And then finally, in the United States, we often get to choose the religion or not to have a religion of our choice or of our family. And whereas in Saudi Arabia, you do not get a choice in religion, and there can be dire consequences if you do choose to not espouse the religion of the country. Next, people should tell it like it is, even if it hurts, or maintaining harmony is important, even if it means not telling the truth. Again, the top represents more Western thinking, and the bottom is very much Asian. We're saving face and making sure that we're keeping the peace is very much valued in Asian cultures. Next, I prefer to work independently and be recognized individually, or I prefer to work as part of a group and think it's better when individuals are not singled out. The top again, very Western. The bottom is almost the rest of the world. Again, this is the independence versus the interdependence thinking of many Western cultures in comparison with other cultures. When rules are presented, I prefer every detail to be spelled out, or some rules are understood by everyone, so it's not necessary to spell everything out. We see similar patterns again, and at the bottom, almost the rest of the world. Of course, we see the very black and white, policy-driven concepts of the West and Germany, Switzerland, United States, and then in many other cultures, there are things that are understood, and negotiation is key here. Well, hey, I don't know what the rules are, but I'm going to do what I need to do to get what I want. And so there can be some clashes sometimes there between those two cultural styles. So in evaluating what your value is, and here's an overview of all of them, you can see that so often, sometimes our contrasts can create challenges. If you want to learn more, you can read The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. In To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus Finch says, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." By acknowledging our own values and recognizing that others may have different, even contrasting viewpoints, we can build empathy and begin the arduous work of bridging divides.
The summary of the chapter. Dr. Jansen begins his article by introducing the emergence of research and writing on the link between emotion and decision-making, especially in the context of educational change. Schools are emotionally charged spaces, and approaches have been behavioristic, rationalistic, and instrumentalist in orientation, seeking the what rather than the why. He explains that leaders are emotional subjects with the authority to shape the emotional disposition of an organization, and ignoring this authority significantly reduces the chance of achieving deep change. Thesis number 1, we must recognize the politics of emotions that energize behaviors. Dr. Jansen warns that, in racially divided communities, an aggressive act or complaint cannot be resolved through policy reform or curricular change only. In the case of outright aggression or racial insult, the direct approach must name the act in order to resolve it. Only then can underlying issues be addressed. Thesis number 2, the change strategy cannot create victims. Change does not happen when the other side of oppression, such as the second generation of whites born after apartheid in South Africa, are treated as oppressors because they are victims too. Leaders must take both sides into account and move with empathy to enable a critical dialogue to be able to take place. Thesis number 3, the problem must be named and confronted. The question is not whether this must be done, but rather how, for the approach is critical. It matters that the response to the situation is consistent with what is said everywhere else in the organization, and that there is a clear indication of support to the teacher to enable her in her language, attitudes, and beliefs within the situation. Thesis 4, leaders must exemplify the expected standard of behavior. Those who observe leadership behavior take cues from their leaders. Dr. Jansen's research shows that leaders who lead through demonstration open more inclusive and enriching networks of friends and colleagues that liberate them from their own prejudices. Thesis 5, we must engage emotionally with students in their world. The assumption that by introducing new knowledge in the curriculum that is logical and rational, one can change the mind of those in divided communities, staff and students, is simply wrong. This work requires emotional engagement that also involves the changing of the teacher. This requires building empathy. Thesis 6. Teachers and principals are themselves emotional actors. According to Dr. Jansen, in divided communities, as elsewhere, teachers and principals come into schools and universities with their personal histories that have shaped their understandings of other people. These cannot be shaken off. Often unconsciously, teachers and leaders make choices including attention, literature, and tools, praise and support on the basis of race. Thesis 7. The environment must accommodate risk. It is extremely difficult in situations for human beings to unburden themselves in private or public space. Human beings do not willingly release painful memories, especially not on a public platform, that could draw the ire of victims and impose shame by association. It is critical in a post-conflict pedagogy that the teacher creates an atmosphere and structures teaching-learning episodes in ways that reduce the risk of speaking openly about direct and indirect knowledge. Students must be reassured that teachers can be trusted with such personal knowledge, which can be done through the example of teacher leaders. It is only when the students trust the teacher leader that the ability to speak honestly is made possible. So the application to our work. My work is ensuring that students have equitable opportunity to learn material and looking at authentic performance-based assessments. Our district is working on having some of those difficult conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We found out firsthand how important trust is in the conversation with parents, students, community members, and staff. Every one of our students, those who feel marginalized for political beliefs, sexual preference, gender identity, class, socioeconomic status, or any other reason, need to feel that they have the same right as everyone else in our classrooms to succeed and that they have the ability to do so.
And in my work of advocating on behalf of culturally and linguistically diverse students, developing empathy has become the starting place in fostering intercultural competence within university faculty and staff. Jansen's sixth thesis asks leaders to, quote, come to terms with the politics of emotion in their own lives, to therefore be trusted to engage students in this case in the subjects of race, emotion, and change. By inviting faculty and staff to recognize their own cultural values and biases, I can engage them through empathy in order to build intercultural competence.
In regards to application to our classmates' work, Corinne is focusing on implicit bias and teacher training for diversity. Wendy, continued growth and focus, intentional focus on evaluating and developing culture and implementing and impacting change. Sarah, with transfer student success defined by persistence, retention, and graduation rates, and student satisfaction and experience. And Krista is working with community college students that begin their educational careers as poorer performing students, then change to become high performers, which fits really well into the empathy theme of this chapter.
So looking at Jansen's other works, he is the author of numerous texts, but a seminal work cited within this article is Knowledge in the Blood. This book investigates how white South African students remember and enact an apartheid past to which they were not participants. Jansen studies the effects of social and political change after apartheid as white students first experience learning and living alongside Black students. In the book, Jansen investigates both pedagogical interventions and the role they played in confronting the past, and critical theory's limits in dealing with conflict in a society whose notions of victims and perpetrators are no longer clear-cut. According to the author, although he originally set out to tell the story of how white students changed under the leadership of a diverse group of senior academics, Knowledge in the Blood ultimately became an unexpected account of how these students changed him.
In the following video, Dr. Jansen discusses his disappointment and self-deception in the school system since the 1990s in post-apartheid South Africa. He offers his expectations based on language of programs, theories, etc., and that the differences now between schools are not only race, but class, which no one expected.
Well, I'm very, very disappointed in what happened since the 90s, because that is not what we dreamed. We dreamed about a school system that would be equal, that would be democratic, that would be decent, and that would serve all of our young people, with the same quality of education and so on. But that didn't happen. In fact, we have a bigger divide now in education, not so much on race, even though that's still there, but more on the basis of class. And so you'd find privileged white and black kids in the better schools, and this mass of largely black kids in the most disadvantaged schools. And when you get into provinces, such as the Eastern Cape or Limpopo, it gets really bad, And none of us expected this. We all expected that there would be good governance, there would be daily teaching, there would be strong leadership in the schools, there would be a liberating curriculum. That was the language, we spoke with. And today we have an absolute mess. Now, that's one part of the problem. The bigger problem is that those in power, the people in charge of the school system, the politicians, don't think there's anything wrong. They think they're doing very well. Once a year they do a war dance, around the grade 12 results and pat each other on the back and says, guess what? We've increased the pass rate by a percentage or two, I mean, it is so incredibly dangerous, the self-deception. You can have a problem and then fix it. But if you're telling yourself that it's not really a big problem, then you have the kind of hopelessness you see in South Africa today.
Right. So in this article, Jansen describes the concept of knowledge in the blood as the complex spiritual, emotional, psychological, and political learnings that together constitute knowledge, which comes from the heart as much as from the head. To enact change requires emotional engagement with the subject. Emotional engagement begins with empathy and the honest work of recognizing our values in order to understand another's. Thank you so much.